Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Legends of Tomorrow as well as the latest episode of Arrow. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow, you can skip to what I say about this week's episode of Arrow. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow. A great episode. So much crazy stuff went down this episode. So much great stuff went down. So let's break everything down. Obviously, it turns out the reason why Sarah hasn't been able to get in contact with Ava isn't because Ava was ignoring her. Turns out Ava was kidnapped by Desmond, aka Neuron. And so it seemed like, he was preparing her body. And it seemed like, so I was like, that was kind of interesting because, why would he need to be in a different body? I guess because maybe Desmond's body just no longer suited him. And I guess in the long run, it's like the whole thing he wanted Hank to do for him, if he could be in Ava's body, so it works out for him. But it's like, what we end up finding out is that it's all about a Tabitha, which is interesting. We don't really know what Tabitha is and who she, I guess she's kind of like Neuron's wife or something, kind of like, they're like a demonic duo of causing mayhem and stuff like that. It's actually kind of interesting kind of finding out more about what Neuron's whole situation is. Neuron kind of feeds onto people's anger and fear, kind of basically nudges them, kind of suggests them to kind of give into their more, give into their fear, give into their anger, and kind of let that kind of consume them. Kind of causes a lot of chaos around them. That was kind of interesting. Obviously, Sarah goes inside of, to Purgatory to try and rescue Ava. And I love Gary immediately when he found out that Ava was in trouble. It's like, she's going to need me. And he shows up there and he's like, I'm going to take care of you, Ava. Whatever you need, I'm going to be there. And he's like, I'm also going to do the same thing for Sarah. But it was kind of interesting because when we look and see Ava's Purgatory was a mall, I'm like, okay, so what's this supposed to represent? And then it's kind of interesting when you really break it down because basically there's 4 different trials that basically Sarah has to go through to save Ava, and each one is basically stuff that she's dealing with. At first, it's the whole situation of Ava's the way she is. She's kind of a bit of a perfectionist, and the thing is, she kind of has a hard time just letting things be. So in the sense of Sarah's all about just kind of flying by the seat of her pants and just kind of she's a wild card essentially. So she's kind of just full steam ahead. Whereas Ava's someone who's no, I'm gonna follow the rules and stuff like that. And in the moment she does follow the rules, it's just this one thing is out of place. But Sarah's when it's all said and done, the fact of the matter is, it's not perfect, but it's ours. Can you be okay with that? And she is. It actually led to another interesting conversation, too, of Ava, it wasn't okay with the whole torturing of creatures, no matter what the circumstances were. That was just kind of her an excuse, because truth be told, she was scared, because her and, Sarah disagreed on something, and she, what she does is she goes back into a corner, and she kind of stands her ground in that certain regard. So for her, it was just that was the stance she took up, not because she really believed into it. She just needed it as an excuse to, probably didn't want to tell Sarah the real truth of just kind of I'm scared about, I get all defensive. That's my, it's kind of her defense mechanism. I also really like the fact is that Gary is there in her subconscious. It's why is, and Sarah being why is Gary in your subconscious? Ava's I got some real unresolved Gary issues. I'm so curious what those unresolved issues are exactly. That's so interesting. But, like I said, breaking down each step, the next step, picking out a mattress, it's because for Ava, her fear, obviously it's I love the whole conversation because it's it's $600. Sarah's nah, get one for $250. And she's it'll get saggy in a year. And Sarah's that's okay, just flip it over. She's so that's how you handle things when it gets a little saggy or whatever, you just flip it over. And Sarah's okay, so I see that this is more than just the mattress, because it's representative of her growing older, not just growing older, but growing older as Sarah. And I was she's I don't want to grow older. I'm what's that about? It's because Sarah has lived the life that she has. Settling down doesn't seem like it's necessarily in Sarah's window. And so I think Ava's fear is eventually down the road, maybe you'll get bored, spending the rest of your life, 50 years in this example of together with one person. That's a lot to ask for. But for Sarah, it's and it's actually kind of endearing when you hear her response of basically because of her life, everything that she's been through, tomorrow has never been guaranteed for her. And she just even thinking that, hey, maybe I will have a tomorrow, makes her feel like she's tempting fate. So she never really wanted to give it a chance. So she wanted to make it seem I'm fine with just kind of going day to day and stuff like that. But it's like, no, like that all changed the moment she met Ava. She fell madly in love, and it's like you change all that. So like she's willing to take that step. Then the next step is like, oh yeah, every little broken thing. It's just the whole like mundane life of like, oh yeah, something gets broken, gotta fix it. But it's just a whole kind of continuation of that, because for Ava, it's like, we haven't moved in. It feels like we're living two separate lives. It's almost like for her, it almost probably feels like Sarah's always going to make an excuse to run away, to go, off on some exciting adventure. It's like life can be boring sometimes, and because for Ava, it's like, yeah, we're both time traveling superheroes, like you said, but the fact of the matter is, I want to have things outside of work. I want to have a hobby. I want to spend my life with you, and sometimes that looks boring. And Sarah doesn't seem like she's a type that would ever have a boring life, so you can see where that complication would come from. But then, like, I really like the last one, what that represents too, because it's all these different Avas. They didn't expressly say this, but Ava at the end was kind of like, you could have picked any of those women. And Sarah's like, no, I want you. Because I think you could make it, my assumption was like subconsciously she was thinking about the fact, because obviously she's a clone, so for her it's like, oh, there's so many other Avas out there you could have. I mean, I guess it's a combination. It could be, you could look at it as like, oh, there's the whole clone Ava situation of all these other women, like why would you pick me above anyone else? But it's like, because you're the Ava I fell in love with, you're Ava to me, none of them are, that type of thing. So you're the person I fell in love with. And the same thing kind of applies in the other example, but they happen to look like Ava, but it just be like, oh, these are all the different women you could have. Like, you could have, but I guess it's a combination of two. It's like you could have, you could have a sexy Ava, this Ava, that Ava, blah, blah, blah. But it's like none of those Avas are the Avas she knows and she loves. And that's what matters at the end of the day. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Like I said, it's just kind of like, it was almost like a therapy session in a certain regard. DC and its therapy sessions. If you're watching Doom Patrol, you'll get what I'm trying to say in that regard. But it's just so interesting, and I thought it was kind of sweet, how it was all said and done, and they end up coming back together, and it's like Sarah did it, And I think because of this, obviously Ava and Sarah are going to be in a better place. Like I think they come out of this stronger, And I'm like, yeah. Avalanche is back on, and I even love the having your sweet moment. And Gary's like, yeah, we did it. It's like, damn it, Gary. You're the reason why Ava has such unresolved issues when it comes to you. But nevertheless, it is kind of sweet in the end. I even love Ava like, oh, should we talk about having children? And Sarah's like, yeah, let's wait for the 8 that we already have to grow up before we really start going down that lane. I love that. So that was really sweet to kind of see that side of things. Another side of things involved Nate. Obviously, him and Ray spending the day together, obviously learning the truth about what his dad was up to. We end up sadly finding out, like, obviously Hank started off this doing what Neuron wanted. It turns out Neuron wasn't trying to necessarily make an army of monsters. He basically wanted monsters to terrify humans so that they'd be forced to kind of push them in a situation so he could gather up their souls. That's what his whole plan was. I thought it was like an army of monsters. Turned out not to be the case. But Hank backed out on that side of things and created this, because of the time he started spending with Nate, it rekindled that relationship, and he wanted to do something good to kind of help bridge that relationship even more between him and Nate. Or to close that bridge even more. And so for him, this whole theme park thing, was there. Obviously, Nate meets with Mikey, or Mr. T, to not you know what I'm trying to say. Nevertheless, to get rid of it. It's actually interesting. It's like he was making I love that comment. Like Mikey was like, "Oh, can you imagine like a unicorn jousting?" And Ray was like, "Yeah, I try not to." It's like, yeah, you'd probably feel like that considering the fact is your experience of learning oh yeah, unicorns are the cute, adorable things that you think they are. That they are killers and rip your heart out and eat it type of creature. So it's like, yeah, last thing I want is those two things, like jousting and just one unicorn was enough for a lifetime. So initially Nate wants it torn down, but then Nate learns that wow, his dad had changed. Nate had changed him. That time they spent together showed his dad who he could really be, and Ray's telling him to kind of embrace that. So Nate doesn't want the theme park taken down anymore. I'm curious, I guess this way rather than kind of going about it the way his dad is, his dad did, torturing them to kind of force them. I think when it's all said and done, Nate's going to keep this theme park alive, but he's going to go about it a different way. This way, the supernaturals don't have to just be locked up. They don't have to just be banished. They can have a place to call their own, a home. They can help share love and laughter and kind of help bring people together. Probably not just humans, but probably also bridge the gap between the supernaturals and the humans. So I think that could be something we end up seeing Nate going down that route in this episode. I mean, going forward. So I thought that's kind of neat. I also love the whole Zari situation of like Mona's asking like, oh, what are you going to text him and all that. And Charlie, like they're trying to be like, oh, send emojis, and even Mick gets involved and he's like, well, this is what you should say. It's written words. It's a little erotic, but vulnerable. And she reads a little bit. She's like, I'm not going to say bulge. And so Zari kind of does it her own lane of like, you know what? I'm going to say this. Let's, essentially sets up a date and everything. And then immediately when Charlie's like, yeah, now it's all on Nate to respond. And then Zari starts... She's like, oh God, what did I do? And it's actually super adorable to see her like that, to see her kind of all flustered like that and just kind of like nervous. It's super sweet. And luckily for her, I guess you can make the argument, sadly, because Nate stopped the wrecking ball, his phone got messed up, and Zari's like, no, it was nothing. He's like, are you sure? And she's acting all nervous and stuff. He's like, Zari, pointing her the right way to go. He's like, right. She's like, right. It's like, you never see her like that. It's super adorable. I love it. I love that those three are so, Mona, Charlie, and Mick are so invested in Zari's love life. I think more so Mick is probably, as a published author and everything. Charlie's coming more so from the angle of like, oh, you want to bone Nate, so there's that side of things. Mona's coming from the more emotional side of things, of being like, oh, love and everything, so... But, Mick is kind of coming from that angle, too, of, like, romance and stuff like that, too, because it's like, doesn't matter, love is love, essentially. So I thought it's kind of neat. Obviously, another big part of this is the whole situation between Constantine, Nora, and Neuron, because it's a situation of obviously Neuron can kind of tap into everyone's darkest thing, and for Nora that's obviously like tapping into that more evil side of her powers, the darker side, and then for Constantine it's obviously looking at Desmond, remembering every the terrible things that he did, and obviously Neuron is very good at getting into people's head. He was getting into Nate's head at one point in time. And it seemed like he was doing it to Nora, too, because Nora was like, yeah, John was there. He was kind to me when he tried to save me. But then the moment he failed, he abandoned me. He knew what the order was going to do to me, and he left me anyway. Obviously, that was all part of the plan anyway. Obviously, like, his main focus is Constantine, but obviously, like, it goes beyond just Constantine. So, like I said, we already kind of got a grander picture of what he's up to. But sadly, when it's all said and done, they try to stop Neuron, but Ray, being who he is, obviously caring about Nora, steps in, and Nora, I guess, to prevent him potentially from taking over her body or something, she reached into herself, so I guess either that was her draining some of her own life force as magic or something like that, or she just summoned up a large amount of magic she wasn't quite used to using and tried to attack Neuron with it, and ends up backlashing. Was it just because Neuron was that strong? Like I said, did she use her own life force? Was that her kind of casting her soul out just so that he wouldn't be able to kind of get control of it or something? I don't know. It definitely ended in a situation with her knocked out, kind of in a coma, or at the very least it seems like a coma. And so at that point I was like, okay. So I was like, is Neuron in who I think it is? I was like, at first I was like, is he in Constantine? It's like, no. I was like, don't tell me it's... Lo and behold, he's in Ray. Now that's definitely going to be interesting, considering the fact, I guess that's going to be him pushing more so to put Tabitha inside of Nora's body, kind of make her potentially the next host, because I think he knows that he could, make her vulnerable with Ray, using him kind of as a hostage, or at the very least pretending to be Ray to kind of manipulate Nora. If not even that, just manipulate the team into doing stuff. That's definitely going to be interesting to see how that ends up all playing out, especially because, I brought it up the whole conversation before. I thought like, oh, they made that whole point of like, oh no, you're like always going to be like my bro, between Nate and Ray, and it's like I was wondering what situation would come up. Like that's because before I thought like, oh, is Constantine not going to tell them for whatever reason? It's like, no, lo and behold, he told everybody straight from the start, and it's like, well, he just didn't get to Nate yet, but obviously Nate immediately found out. But now Nate's in that situation of like the demon who killed his dad is now inside of his best bro, you know? So it's going to be, that's a whole complicated situation as well, especially after they just rescued Ava. It looks like they had a win, because you also have Constantine kind of under the impression that Neron's gone now, but now that means they're even less suspecting, so he can kind of do whatever he wants. All he has to do is pretend to be Ray, so that's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of that takes us going forward. Especially because I believe Nora would be the only one that could tell, because she has that connection with Neron, so that as long as she's in that state, she can't wake up and be like, oh, he's inside of Ray now, like, because of their connection. So it kind of works in his benefit that she's out of commission right now, because it means he can kind of go unabated, like he can kind of do whatever he wants to right now. So we'll see how that all plays out. You do have the sweet moment of Constantine trying to tell Nora, like, you know, he's like, I'm gonna be there for you. Like, I wasn't there for you before, but I will be now. Oh yeah, I also can't forget about the aspect of like, oh yeah, Desmond, you know, it's free now, but it's like, you still sent me to hell, John. It's like, I'm not going to forget that, because both of us are just going to have to live with that. So I don't know if there's ever going to be any repairing him and Desmond's relationship. It's like, it's a complicated situation. Like, John's already got a lot of demons and a lot of self-hate because of mistakes that he's made in the past, and he has to live with them. And I mean, at least he knows Desmond's okay, so there's that. Like, you know, things might not work out between them, but at the very least he knows Desmond's okay, so that's at least some weight off his shoulders to a certain extent. It still doesn't make him feel any less guilty about what he did, you know, especially because Desmond's not going to let him feel any less guilty about it, because it's like, you know, so it's going to be interesting to see will anything further come from that or not. And now moving on to this week's episode of Arrow. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode. Basically trying to track down a lot of stuff about what Emiko and the Ninth Circle is up to. John turns to his stepfather, played by Ernie Hudson, which is crazy. If you don't know Ernie Hudson, he's been in so many different things. I think The Crow might be the first thing that I really kind of got to know him from, the movie from like the 90s. Obviously Ghostbusters. Like, Ernie Hudson has done a lot of stuff, dude. So it's kind of crazy. Like, yo! The moment the way him and John were interacting, I was like, oh, he's your dad. And it's like, nope, stepdad, because like, right, the whole Stewart last name and everything. And it's like that little nod. But nevertheless, it's interesting. John has a very complicated relationship with his stepfather, which Oliver knows all about those relationships. It seems that for John, he believes his stepdad kind of left, you know, his father behind. Like, they were on a mission. The operation was his, and it led to his dad, you know, staying behind and making sure that everyone got out. So Stewart was able to get out, but not John's dad. And John's pretty much hated him since, especially because he pops up like 6 months later after the whole thing. Then him and Diggle's mom got married. He put Diggle and his brother through these Spartan training and stuff like that. It's like, it's tough love. You may hate me, but the fact is what I'm doing is making you better. John inadvertently, though, ends up finding out that his whole situation with his dad, because the fact is that, you know, when they were being tortured and everything, he ended up, General Stewart gave up the passwords just to protect John, showing you it's like, yeah, he could take the torture himself, but the moment he saw John taking it, he was like, no, I can't do that. So it kind of made John go like, okay, what the hell is going on? The fact is, he's not willing to leave someone behind now, but I guess maybe John's thinking like, well, maybe this is him listening to me, but it's like he always felt that, because it turns out the truth is, during that operation, it actually went very smoothly. It's actually John's dad's the one that kind of got sloppy and kind of went in not fully prepared. And so basically General Stewart lied to John, and it was so interesting when you hear him kind of break it down and kind of explain what exactly happened. For him, it's like, every child deserves to look at their father like a hero, and he's like, because you believed your dad was a hero, look at who you are right now, who you became. And it's so interesting considering the fact is that he was like, oh, the fact of the matter is, earlier he was kind of chewing John up, being like, oh, the fact is you abandoned your career, you did all you could have been, your career trajectory could have taken you to higher places, but here you are simply working with the SCPD, you're a vigilante. Like, that's all. It's not a career path. This isn't the way your life is going to be. It's just a dead-end road, essentially. And John was basically like, the fact of the matter is, I did it not for my job. I did it to protect my family, like, you know, leaving behind his job at Argus. Because for him, it's like, protecting family, he's like, that comes first, something you don't know about. I think he said all this stuff just to kind of keep up the lie, to keep John hating him. But I think he wanted John to go on and be a hero and stuff like that. But I think when he sees John in action and see what he's capable of in the field, I think for him it made him go, no, you are the hero I always knew you would grow up to be. You don't have to be in some higher position. Being Spartan as you are now shows me that you are the hero that you are. And the fact of the matter is like, if your dad could see, he'd be so proud of you. And he's like, if I am a hero, it's because of you that I am one. I'm like, dude. And they hug and everything. I didn't even love him leaving. He's like, also, make sure you call your mother. And you see John kind of smile. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I even love Felicity kind of busted him a little bit earlier in the episode, because she's like, oh, it's nice to meet you, General Stewart, the stepfather of that John never told us his longest and best friends about. I love that. It's like, which is so interesting, considering the fact is, it's like, there's always been the whole aspect of secrets, but now when you look at things, you understand why John never really brought up his stepdad, obviously. But it's so interesting to kind of see things kind of play out like that. There was an interesting little detail. Was that my imagination? Was Dante whistling the same tune that Neron was whistling in Legends? Maybe just say he just happened to be whistling a tune and I just assumed. I mean, I just watched the episode before I watched this one, but it's just, I don't know why. Maybe I'm just because whistling, it just all blurred together to me, but it sounded like it might have been the same tune. Maybe I'm just being crazy, or maybe there's something subtle there. Maybe Neron is connected to the Ninth Circle. Wouldn't make sense and everything. I mean, he makes a point to bring it up in Legends that like, oh, John, you left me here to my own vices in 2018. So that does bear the question of, I don't know. That could be something, maybe not. I mean, to be fair, it's like, Legends does come on before Arrow. Usually the positioning of the shows does affect things like that. So maybe that's something we're seeing there. Maybe that's supposed to... I mean, once again, it's like the whole like Ninth Circle obviously is like Dante and Virgil and stuff like that, but this all has to deal with hell, for like Dante's Inferno and stuff like that. And obviously Neron being a demon and stuff, who feeds on fear and anger and stuff. It makes me wonder, especially because it definitely seems that he's got plans. But nevertheless, this could all be stuff that technically has been going down before, like, technically everything in this episode is happening before everything went down in Legends, him leaving Desmond's body and stuff like that. This could have been stuff that he orchestrated while he was still working with Hank and stuff like that, so we'll wait and see. Maybe, like I said, maybe in the end that's just me being crazy and it turns out not to be the case at all. What I also thought was kind of an interesting conversation was obviously the whole Archer program. It ended up getting stolen from Felicity. And for Felicity, she wanted the Archer program to be... It's not just about helping people. It's also about her legacy of helping people. Because being Overwatch is fine and dandy. She loves Team Arrow, but she wanted something of her own to kind of put her name, her stamp on the world of like, this is something I did, not as Overwatch, but as Felicity Smoke. I mean, everyone wants to kind of leave their mark on the world, and this Archer was going to be hers, but she deletes the files for it, so that she can make sure that Emiko and them don't end up using it. I love her, like, kind of panic for being like, the fact of the matter is, it's like, I just realized I'm a mad scientist. She's like, no, worse, I'm my father because I created something that had the intention of being good, but now ultimately it's like, no, it's potentially... It could be the end of the city that I started out trying to use it to protect. So I thought that was such a fascinating thing. And obviously she's telling Helena like, oh, we'll find some other route, but Helena's not really listening. And the moment I'm like, we know Archer's available in the future, so it's like Helena doesn't listen to Felicity because there's a guy named Magnus that they're going to try and spread and make it... It's hard to say whether Helena did that just because she's like, no, the fact is she never told Felicity... Because even Felicity in the future is like, wait, what's going on here? It must have gotten modified. Because in her mind, she probably thought, oh, they just somehow recreated Archer. Maybe that was her thought process. But the fact is that it exists in the future and it's enhanced must mean that Magnus must have been connected to what eventually became Galaxy 1 or something like that for things to kind of play out the way it did. So... But that must mean Helena must have never told Felicity because she knew if she ever told Felicity, Felicity would never be okay with. So is it a situation of Helena's just trying to get paid? But I think it's more so because she does believe in Felicity, and I think she wanted to make sure that Felicity got the legacy she deserved because she does believe in Felicity because she's like, it's not just an Archer program. The fact of the matter is if the world was going to be saved, it's going to be because of who you are as Felicity Smoke, You're the important thing in this, not Archer. So that depends on whether we see what Helena does or not. I'm assuming just the way she's looking at flash drive and everything, it's like, oh no, she made the deal and stuff behind her back, but that's only assumptions for right now. But like I said, the way she looked at, and it's so interesting because basically they made it so that Archer is a lot more portable, and obviously its power has expanded. So basically, kind of turning these people into having almost like a sixth sense. Sense is what that whole situation is about. It's like one soldier was able to take down like half the Canaries. Like now they've got like a whole full blown army tapping into this thing. So that's really interesting. And I guess it's almost interesting too, because obviously I didn't really think about it until this episode of like, oh, it's kind of, I guess, a little reminiscent of like Spartans to a certain extent, and obviously that's the title of this episode. But obviously you thought that has something, obviously that deals with General Stewart as well as John, because John is Spartan. Obviously the Spartan training his dad put him, or his stepfather put him through, that whole thing. So, but I think that's maybe what they're supposed to just straight up represent anyway as Spartans. But nevertheless, that whole conversation is interesting too because of the complicated nature of John has with his stepfather. Everything got mended, but we learn in the future that the whole conversation is, obviously we're focusing on Connor, the adopted son. The whole conversation about John Jr. now, we find out where he is. Apparently he's leading the Deathstroke gang. Was not expecting that. Basically, it seems like obviously him and Diggle kind of butt heads a lot. I guess it's that type of thing of tough love of like, I put you through a lot. Like, it might not seem like I love you, but I do. It's just because I'm doing this because I want you to be prepared for what's to come. Maybe John knew what was coming at, him and Lila, and so they wanted both of their children to be prepared. And it's kind of interesting now I think about that in retrospect. I didn't even think about it until just now. It's like, you got two sons just like your dad your stepfather kind of dealt with you and your brother, Which is almost foreshadowing to a certain extent too. Because it's like, obviously John Jr. is with the Deathstroke gang, and obviously him and, Connor are on two different sides of things. Obviously it's like, they're foster brothers, but still, it's kind of interesting because it's very reflective of John's relationship with his own brother. So it's almost, the cycle of history kind of repeating like that is crazy. It's actually interesting because this actually situation of getting the module that they needed from the Deathstroke gang actually brought Mia and Connor closer, because for her it's like, I never realized how tough your life was, because Connor thought like, oh, maybe given enough time his brother would grow past all this. But for him, it's like, being who he is now, it's like, oh, like, this is what mom and dad always thought I was going to be, so why not embrace who they always thought I was going to be? So it's like, for him, it's like, why would I try to be anyone else? Because he tried so hard to prove something to them, and I guess in particular to his dad, kind of the downside of having a, hero for a father, especially with the whole vigilante situation, the way they're trying to paint it in a lot of people's eyes and stuff like that. Just what that kind of strain it put on, Mia, what it put on Connor, what it put on, John Jr. But Mia realizes, like, I was kind of a little hard on you, because the fact of the matter is, like, when I look at your situation, you had no one to rely on. Like, much like Mia didn't really have anyone to kind of talk to about what she was going through. But now, when it's all said and done, kind of they're being open with each other. They have each other to rely on. Obviously, there's something there, which I think would be sweet, because it'd be, like, very befitting. Like, obviously, like, he's not John's biological son, but the fact is he's still his son regardless. Which is very foreshadowing, too, just because, like, oh yeah, like, literally, John had that same conversation with his stepdad. His stepdad being like, the fact of the matter is, no matter what the circumstances are, you are my son. And I'm sure John felt the same way about John Jr. I mean, not John, well, obviously with John Jr., but also with Connor as well. But I just think it'd be interesting, because it's like, oh yeah, like, this family gets even tighter, because it's like, oh yeah, like, Felicity and Oliver's kid end up being with John and Lila's other kid, just like, oh, these two close friends and family would be even closer family and friends, it'd be interesting. Obviously it's something there, but Mia's just kind of like, yeah, let's go. Which is also interesting that JJ would send the Deathstroke gang after him. It's like, well, to be fair, John was like, I haven't seen my brother in like over a year, so Connor was like, I don't know what I just said. Connor was like, I haven't seen JJ in over like a year, maybe more. So then it turns into a circumstance of like, do you hate your brother that much? I guess he represents everything like good that your parents like, oh, they probably that thing of like, oh, they favored him more than me. It might be kind of that sibling kind of rivalry, kind of jealousy. So, or maybe it's just the position that he's in. The fact is they didn't introduce him this episode is kind of interesting, because even me is like, oh, when do I get to meet him? So I guess that's going to be something we'll see kind of in nearby future potentially. So there's that side of thing. There's everything with, Renee and Oliver obviously want to tell Emiko the truth about Dante and what he did, because it's interesting, because Renee is like, the fact of the matter is, if someone like Laurel can get redemption, I know there's good in Emiko. I know we can get, get through to her, but... And Oliver obviously wants to do the same thing too, because they believe there's good in her. I even love Oliver and Emiko's little fight, even just like the whole Archer thing of like arrows flying towards each other, they slam into each other and break on impact. But he ends up telling her the truth. Obviously she had reluctance. The fact is, ultimately she does believe him though, because he's like, the fact is Dante doesn't care about you. He killed your mom. The fact of the matter is, he doesn't care about you, but I do. But there he is. Lo and behold, he shows back up and he's there for her. So... But when the time comes, Emiko puts him down, because it's like, you killed my mom. It is pretty much what I thought it was. It's like he wanted her to cut ties with anything that would be considered weakness, and her mom was her weakness, so that she could rise up, because he saw her potential and saw, oh, your mom was holding you back just like your father was. Like, you were so bound to them that you could never reach your full potential. Now, part of me wonders, it seems like she straight up kills Dante, but part of me wonders if we are dealing with the whole Neuron situation, that maybe there's more to this. Maybe I'm curious to see whether there'll be any like heavy like crossover in that regard, or is it just going to be a thing of like, might be a wink and nod to it being a thing, but beyond that, it might not really be a thing to the point it's really worth acknowledging. I have no idea. Like I said, I could be 100% wrong about that whistling thing. It was just a little uncanny, because it's like, oh, we see that's Neuron's thing, and I could have sworn it was the same tune, but I could just be crazy. It could just be like, hey, whistling is just a thing that villains do, so it's interesting, because now even Renee has kind of been like, yeah, at least he's benefited from this situation, because now he's able to see Emiko for who she is. And I think Emiko's going down that path so far that even though she's killed Dante, I don't know if she's actually going to... I think she's still going to go through with this, because I think she feels like no matter what the circumstances are, the Ninth Circle is mine to do what I want to with. And the fact of the matter is, kind of like almost like that League of Assassins type of thing, she might kind of look at it as kind of like, we are bringing balance to this world type of thing. So we could see that direction kind of happening with her. So she thinks she's still on the right side of things, no matter what circumstances led her to this particular decision. So it's gonna be interesting to see what ends up happening because of all of that. Especially because she has that biological weapon that can pretty much eat through anything. So once again, it's like we are getting steps towards understanding how we got to where everyone is, in the future, understanding how those circumstances present day led to that, but still, there's still quite a bit, obviously, we still got to, circle off and cross off the list to kind of get to that future and understand how we got there. With everything, all these lies and secrets, it does beg the question of, is it going to be a situation of something's going to happen to change the timeline, that future we see is just a possibility, that it isn't 100% guaranteed, that if something happens that changes everything, that timeline potentially gets erased, or, obviously a new one gets created. It's definitely going to be interesting to see, what the next episode has in store for us with all of this. Like I said, I just get the feeling like just that Dante thing isn't over with, but maybe it is. Like I said, we'll see. It's going to be, like I said, I'm curious to see what Emiko is going to do. Will her rage consume her, or will she try and find another way? Will she actually help Team Arrow try and stop, the Ninth Circle? We'll have to wait and see. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time with me, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.